You pray with me. God, teach us to be a people who are generous at heart, who love before we are loved and give before we receive. May all my words bring you glory and all my reflections of heart bring you praise. Amen. Now, I imagine that we all know the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's not in the Bible. You know, people think that it is, but it's really not, at least not that way. And I recently read an article about a platinum rule that would be higher than the golden rule. And it goes like this. Treat others in the way they like to be treated. Think about that just for a moment. Now for me, that switch took a little bit of pondering, and I found myself thinking about the various conversations that we could have about generosity and how we treat each other. Generosity is, to get a definition out in front of us, generosity is sharing with others freely without thought of return. Now that's a pretty vague, big definition of generosity. It is a willingness to offer money, assistance, and energy and time when it is needed. Generous giving means that you give something that has real value to you, without expectation of anything in return or even reward. We know that Jesus spoke about generous giving a lot, and I've always been comforted, especially at times when I had little money to give, that Jesus valued the single coin of a poor widow more than all the gold and silver that was donated by people who had plenty of it to give. I've always wondered about what motivated that widow to give her last mite. I think that's an important question when we talk about generosity, and not just of money, but of talent and time and energy. What does it take for us to give our last ounce of energy, our last minute, our last dime? I took the title of the sermon from our passage in Acts, where Paul is calling the religious leaders from Ephesus to him, come to him for a final meeting before he leaves for Jerusalem and what would be more than likely the end of his life. This is his goodbye message to them, and he makes sure that they understand how important generosity truly is. He reminds them of his teachings and sacrifices along the way. Paul often spoke of the sacrifices that he was making. And then he says his farewell, telling them that he has but one task left to finish. And he says, what matters most to me is to finish what God started. The job Jesus gave me of letting everyone I meet know all about this incredibly extravagant generosity of God. Now, I don't know about you, but it kind of stops me dead in my tracks to actually contemplate the incredibly extravagant generosity of God. Now, if I ask you right now to shout out what you think makes up this amazing generosity of God, you would list many, many things, and they would all be true. Would all be a part of how we experience God's generosity, because we all experience it in our own way. And if I ask you to name the appropriate responses to that generosity, you would be able to list many approaches and things that people do to show our gratitude to God. Paul leaves no room for misunderstanding. Responding to this generosity of God demands that we make a radical life change before God and begin to trust Jesus with equally radical trust. Now, this is where the so-called rubber hits most of our roads. According to people who study this kind of thing, and I was a motivator for personal generosity and the fact that they enjoy giving to others. And if we are truly open to it, it is in the making of this connection that we experience what Paul calls a radical life change, which includes radical trust. So here we are, in the beginning of the fall, looking at all God has done for us as a people. And you may know that the stewardship team and some board members went last weekend to a stewardship summit sponsored by MCC. Two of our elders were the presenters, giving us the same information they had shared several times with other MCC churches. There were many churches from all over the U.S. and even Canada present in that summit. It was an amazing thing to me to watch the Spirit work in all those church teams and feel the energy and passion in the room literally expand. The same was true for your team as we spoke of the hard task of asking for time, talent, and treasure, and looked for ways to make it a spiritual practice, or at the very least, a growing experience for all of us. At this point, we began to study together what we thought it would look like if Open Circle more fully lived into and expanded what we call a culture of generosity. And before, or at least just slightly after, you start thinking that the pastor has gone to meddling and started preaching on money, I want to tell you that this is not the case. The team decided that this fall was the time we wanted to talk about and live into this culture of generosity, a radical life change before God. But we didn't really know where to start. What does such a culture look like, and how shall we encourage everyone at Open Circle to try on whatever part of that culture feels safe and comfortable? So today I want to talk just a little bit about what a growing into a more intentionally developed culture of generosity might look like. This is not to say that we as a people are not already generous with our time, talent, and treasure. But we have much to learn about how this generosity already planted among us can grow and flourish and blossom into a place where God's incredible, extravagant generosity can be felt and shared every moment of every day. So I began to think about the things that have nothing to do with money first. I don't know about you, but that's where I am most comfortable and where I feel I can explore and expand what I already know. I know that ever since I turned about 50, a decade ago, I have been thinking about my legacy. What do I want to leave this world? Since it is unlikely that I will come into great wealth before my final journey, I want to focus on the other wealth that I have to give away here at Open Circle and in the wider world. Nelson Henderson once said this: "The true meaning of life is to plant trees, under whose shade you do not expect to sit." Let me say that again. The true meaning of life is to plant trees, under whose shade you do not expect to sit. A culture of generosity will cause us to think about our intentionality. In other words, what are we intending to do? If we are not actively thinking about our intentionality, we tend to slip into old ways, or ways that don't generate excitement or gratitude, or ways that simply don't enable us as people and as a community to grow. Borrowing just a little from here and there from an article on generous leadership by Bruna Martinuzzi, I want to make some suggestions of attributes or characteristics of a culture of generosity that we can contemplate here at the very beginning of our study. First, we can, as a people, make feels important. Important to us and important to God. We can be more deliberate in our thanksgivings for the valuable work that each of us does in this place. And we can be more purposeful in recognizing the efforts that our visitors made to spend their Sunday morning in this place. Secondly, we can work to see the positive in everybody by honoring the other person, even at a time when we may need to disagree or work towards a change of heart. In the third place, we can give people visibility by encouraging everyone to find a place of ministry in this community. And when you and they do, we can recognize well and often the callings and ministries of each and every child of God in this place. We can understand and practice forgiveness. Martin Luther King said that the old law of an eye for an eye leaves everyone blind. A generous person carries no resentments. A generous church harbors no negative memories of previous hurts or altercations. What if we could learn to face each challenge on only its own merits and let the past truly not just be the past, but fade into the oblivion provided by God's grace for such a moment as this? Living into a culture of generosity will cause each of us to answer two very important questions. Who do you need to forgive? What do you need to let go? In the fifth place, we can offer encouragement and support freely, even before the request is received. When you consider that a great majority of us sitting here have never really experienced ongoing encouragement in our lives, a word of encouragement takes on incredible value. The sixth attribute of a generous culture is that it gives everyone a chance to serve or not, and a chance to make mistakes. So what if you don't quite know what to do the first time you tried something out? The importance comes from the trying on, not the ability to be perfect. In the seventh place, people who live in a generous culture share what they know with each other. They share their expertise and their experience all for free with no strings attached, just for the sheer joy of watching someone else learn a new skill. And in the end, it is up to us to determine whether or not we will become a truly generous people. It takes work and it takes practice. But Jesus calls us to such practice. Generosity, he says, begets generosity. Walt Whitman must have borrowed a little from Jesus when he said, "Giving is like building a muscle. It requires practice and persistence." And finally, I say to you, a generous culture inspires people to be present to each other. There is an African village where the greeting words for good morning or hello are, "I am here if you are here." Imagine the gift we give others when we are fully present with them, when we truly see them. And so present to each other, we live as receivers of God's incredible, extravagant generosity, and we freely give way to God's generosity as it flows through us again and again and again. Amen.